What's the biggest screw-up you ever made that was fixed before anyone knew about it? Story 1. I once made a cake for work and accidentally swapped sugar for salt. While setting it up in the staff lounge, I cut myself a small piece to taste it, and it was horrible. People were already arriving for lunch, and since I was known as the person who baked amazing cakes, everyone was excited to try a slice. Panicking, I had no idea what to do. So, using all my acting skills, I stumbled and dropped the cake on the floor, leaving a huge mess, but saving my reputation. The best part? My boss felt so bad for me, and maybe a little disappointed at not getting any cake, that he told me to run down to the local bakery, pick up a replacement, and he'd cover the cost. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. When I was 15, I tried to bake a carrot cake, and I must have misread the recipe because I ended up adding about 10 times more carrots than I should have. The result? The mushiest cake ever. Guests were already on their way, so in a moment of quick thinking, I told my mom's friends, since 2 of you are bringing your babies, I made it extra soft for them. I also reduced the sugar and added more carrots to make it healthier. They were all touched and kept going on about what a thoughtful, sweet kid I was, baking a special cake just for the babies. The crazy part, the babies loved it. One mom even called my mom several times over the next few months, asking if I could bake that baby-friendly cake again. I tried to replicate it, but no matter what I did, I couldn't. Eventually, I just kept pretending I was too busy. Years later, I met one of those kids again when she was 11. She told me one of her earliest memories was eating that cake and how nothing since had ever compared to it. She was so excited to meet me, the legendary cake baker, I had to break it to her that it was actually just a total baking disaster. Story 3. I used to work at a call center for a big gift company. One day, a couple calls in frantically saying, "We need to cancel our order." I pulled up their info and told them, "Sorry, UPS already has it out for delivery." That's when they explained, "You don't understand. We sent this to our son and his wife, but we accidentally put his ex-wife's name on the card. If they get this gift, it's going to ruin Christmas." Cue panic mode. After some scrambling, I managed to get in touch with UPS and stop the delivery just in time. Not technically my screw-up, but wow, that would have been a holiday disaster. Story 4. I am a veterinarian, and the office I work at is open 24/7 between about 2 o'clock and 4:30 a.m. There are many staff around. One Christmas Eve, I offered to stay at around 4 a.m. The 2 other people on shift went out to grab coffee, and I stayed behind to watch the animals. Most of the animals were fine, but there was a parrot. A few minutes after the others left, the parrot started screaming, making these hideous wailing sounds. I went to check on it and realized its toe was stuck in the cage latch. I freed it and the parrot flew out. Panic mode activated. I chased it around but then lost it. It went quiet, refusing to come out, and I couldn't hear it. Just as the other staff returned, I made up some excuse and went looking again. Luckily, it screeched again, and I found it and got it back in the cage safely. No one ever found out, though I had a mini panic when someone later came in for x-rays and yelled, "Why is there bird poop on the computer?" Edit. I said veterinarian at the start. Hopefully no one thought I meant veteran. Sorry for the confusion. I didn't perform the diagnosis or treatment. I was just watching for symptoms the bird's vet had told us to monitor. It's possible it was cleared to go home with medication, or it was sent to a familiar place for end-of-life care, like when dogs get euthanized at home. Story 5. When I was 16, I spilled red wax all over our cream carpet. I had to clean it up carefully, so I used printer paper and an iron, lay the paper over the wax, iron on low heat, and the wax transfers from the carpet to the paper. The tricky part? My mom, one of those super particular house-proud types, was napping in the next room the whole time. I had to do the entire cleanup without waking her. When we eventually moved out, there was a tiny stain left behind, but she never noticed it until then. Story 6. I was trying to send a corn site link to my girlfriend and somehow shared it on my Facebook wall instead of in a private message. No idea how it happened. I must have been tired or drunk. I didn't even realize until the next day, when I woke up to a message from Facebook saying they'd auto-removed my post because it looked like spam. My heart basically leapt out of my chest. Thank God nobody saw it. I've honestly never been so grateful to a robot in my entire life. Story 7. At work, I was emailing my best friend on my personal email. We often joked using Polak, and since I am part Italian, I'd sometimes call myself a greasy Italian. I typed up an email with those jokes, sent it, and then realized I'd accidentally sent it to a client instead of my friend. Immediate panic. I quickly used Outlook's recall feature and sent an apology explaining it wasn't meant for them. Thankfully, the recall worked. The client never saw the original email. Microsoft Outlook literally saved my ass that day. Story 8. Growing up, my mom always told me not to overload the dryer. It was one of those fancy, expensive models, and she didn't want it to break. I never really took her seriously. Fast forward to after I'd moved out. She had me house sit for a weekend. I, of course, brought all my laundry and tried to wash it in a single load. Predictably, I broke the dryer, and my parents were coming home the next day. Cue full repairman mode. I took the entire dryer apart, or at least the whole front panel, to get into the guts of it. Turns out I'd snapped the band. I called everywhere, and nobody had the part. Finally, I found a random store downtown that specialized in washer and dryer repairs, bought a band that looked close enough, went home, put it on, reassembled the whole thing, and spent my entire Saturday doing it. It's been 3 years, and my mom still doesn't know. Story 9. I once accidentally gave a tiny dog 10 times the amount of painkiller he was supposed to get after surgery. I was completely freaked out when I realized and watched him like a hawk. Thankfully, he recovered just fine and probably felt pretty darn good while he was at it. Edits. It wasn't an opiate, more like doggy ibuprofen. He was fine for several years afterward. He was eventually PTS at age 16 for unrelated issues. The mistake happened because I asked a coworker how much to give. She said 0.9, and I didn't double-check that it should have been 0.09. I had just started working there. Since then, I've taken over as lid tech and implemented safety checks to prevent mistakes like this. Vets and vet techs are human, just like anyone else, and even the smallest hiccups leave lasting impressions on us. I still feel guilty for every toenail I've ever quicked. Story 10. My parents went out for the weekend. I wasn't a bad kid, so there was only one rule: no hookah in the living room. Easy enough, right? Smile, promise not to burn the house down, yada yada. Of course, I ended up smoking hookah in the living room, which had just been recarpeted. One of my friends went to flip the coal, and I warned him, "This is the only rule. If that coal drops, my parents will never let me live it down, and I don't have enough money to recarpet the whole room before they get back." He nodded and went for it. Next thing I know, the red-hot coal falls onto the carpet, sizzling a nice burn hole right in the center. I jump for it, trying to pick it up with my hands. Somehow, I succeed in getting it back onto the hookah, but not before shooting embers onto a floor mat by the door. Luckily, the floor mat was left over from the new rug and had the same weave pattern. One of my friends had a dad who installs rugs professionally. On Sunday, George, now forever dubbed the Carpet Whisperer, worked on his hands and knees, patching the spot I had burned. Half an hour before my parents got home, George finished and left me with the burnt cutout piece, promising not to tell anyone. I still have it tucked away for a special day. Story 11. About a decade ago, I was the online manager for an organization. One Friday night, super tired and working late, I accidentally deleted their entire website. I threw up a "we're doing maintenance" message and spent the next 8 hours desperately searching for another copy of the code, only to discover the organization didn't have a single working backup. In the end, I turned to the Internet Archive, found some of the text, went home at 4 a.m., slept a couple hours, and returned at 7 a.m. Saturday. I then spent the entire weekend locked in my seat, recreating the entire website from scratch: graphics, JavaScript, applets, forms, HTML, everything. I finally walked out at 4 a.m. Monday morning and wandered back into the office at 9 a.m., like nothing had happened. The only fallout? A slow trickle of calls and emails over the next 6 months. My page seems to have disappeared. I blame them on a rotating series of made-up excuses. Story 12. This isn't so much a fuck-up as a near miss. Back when I knew basically nothing about cars, my '87 truck overheated on the way to work. I pulled over, went into a gas station, and grabbed a gallon of water because I thought the solution to an overheated car was just pouring room temperature water into the radiator. What I didn't know: you're supposed to let the engine cool down first. The result was a superheated geyser that missed my face by maybe 6 inches. Never did that again. Story 13. I work for a credit card company. One day, our main systems crashed, so we had to use these ancient DOS systems to access customer accounts. A lady called wanting to reduce her limit from $3,500 to $1,000. Simple, right? Except I didn't know that, with this prehistoric system, you're supposed to delete the old limit first, then set the new one. Because of my mistake, she briefly had a limit of $10,003,500. Yes, over $10 million. The system let me do it because, while our main systems require a credit analyst override to increase a limit, this DOS monstrosity basically let me do whatever I wanted. That moment of panic? Absolutely unforgettable. Story 14. Back in undergrad, I worked in a chemical engineering research lab. My partner and I were building a reactor to contain hydrogen gas, the smallest molecule there is, which makes it notoriously hard to seal. We needed to test whether our prototype could handle high internal pressure, so we submerged it in a 55-gallon barrel of water and started pumping air into it to see if any bubbles escaped. It didn't leak, so we kept pumping air to find the pressure at which it would fail. Spoiler! It didn't leak, it exploded. Fortunately, the water contained the blast, but all that rapidly released air blew the water out of the barrel and flooded our professor's lab. There was no floor drain. You don't want chemicals going into the public water supply, so we had to break into the janitor's closet and clean everything ourselves. To this day, our professor has no idea, and this wasn't even the only time we accidentally blew something up or flooded the lab. And the kicker: designing the reactor wasn't even the main goal of our project. It was just one component of a much larger experiment. Story 15. Late one morning, I was driving 68 miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone. I saw a police officer on the side of the road and pulled over before he could even start his car or turn on his lights. When he came up to the window, he said he had never seen anyone pull themselves over and joked that he wished I had run because that would have been more exciting. 30 seconds later, he gave me a verbal warning and sent me on my way. Incredibly lucky. Story 16. The day I learned how to take apart a VCR and put it back together again will forever be etched in my memory. I was 14. And like most 14-year-olds, any excuse to get curious was enough. I stumbled across my dad's stash of '90s bootleg videos, and being home alone for an hour, decided to indulge. After about 10 minutes, the tape jammed. Cue me trying to eject it and only making things worse. Let's just say clear thinking was no longer an option. I grabbed a screwdriver, disassembled the VCR, carefully removed the tape without damaging the ribbon, and rewound it so it looked untouched. I reassembled the VCR, hid the video again, and never got questioned about it. The biggest kicker? My dad is no longer with us, and now as an adult, I'd love to tell him this story. I know he would have found it hilarious, imagining me in a full-on panic, trying to repair a VCR mid-crisis. Edit. Thanks, Reddit, for making this my most upvoted comment. I can assure you it's a true story, and judging by the responses, I wasn't the only one to ever experience this. I am sure my dad is laughing somewhere up there. Story 17. I very nearly injected a premature baby with Down syndrome with 10 times the amount of Lasix I was supposed to give. I had miscalculated the dose because I placed the decimal in the wrong spot. That baby would almost certainly have died if I had administered it. I had the liquid drawn up in the syringe and even had it in the port, ready to push through, when I noticed how uncharacteristically full the chamber looked. Pediatric IV doses are incredibly tiny. I was supposed to give 0.1 ml and nearly gave 1.0 ml. I needed a very large cup of tea after that. Edit. People have asked how this happened and why the dose wasn't double-checked. That afternoon, there was a couple in the ward with a history of combative behavior. They had previously assaulted a doctor caring for another baby. They were yelling at the nurse taking care of their baby, and the woman who was assisting me said, "You're right with this, aren't you, Janie?" before rushing off to help de-escalate the situation. The chaos and my distraction are most likely why I made the mathematical error in the first place. I did report the incident after I had calmed down, and as a result, that couple was issued a behavioral order for the special care nursery. Also, double-checking is not a foolproof safeguard, though it certainly helps. Two people can both see exactly the wrong thing and still think it's correct. A few years later, I experienced a drug error myself as a patient in the hospital. I was accidentally given 20 times the intended dose of morphine, despite two nurses checking the order, drawing it up, confirming my ID, and verifying the dose at my bedside. Medication errors are, unfortunately, an ongoing reality in hospitals. People will always find ways to circumvent checks and balances, no matter how stringent. Story 18. When I was in high school, I was dating a guy for a few months. One morning, while getting ready for school, I decided to send him a nude. I took the picture, attached a detailed sext, even though the most we'd ever done was touching over our clothes, hit send, and went back to getting ready. 5 minutes later, I was in the back seat of my mom's car and decided to check my phone for a reply. That's when I realized I had sent it to my mom instead. I silently freaked out, though I noticed everything was calm, so she clearly hadn't seen it yet. I saw her purse on the console, phone peeking out with a text notification. I grabbed it as quickly as I could. When she asked what I was doing, I just said, "I am checking to see if I am getting texts." I deleted it, triple-checked, and wiped all evidence from my own phone too. I am almost 24 now, and I am still extremely cautious anytime I send anything even slightly questionable. I won't even text my sister something with a curse word unless I double-check the recipient box. Story 19. During my sophomore year of college, I was failing 3 out of 4 classes near the end of the semester due to too much partying and not enough studying. I managed to drop 2 classes, accept a failing grade in 1, and enroll in a flexible learning course that counted for the semester but gave me 16 weeks to complete it. Had that not worked out, I would have lost my full ride and probably would have had to move back home and attend the community college. I still had to appeal my scholarship and was on academic probation for a year, but I got back on track, and now I've just completed my master's degree. Story 20. I borrowed my brother-in-law's ute while moving some things and by mistake filled it with diesel because I assumed it had a diesel engine. It definitely sounded like one. I had to get it towed and flushed out that night, but luckily no damage was done. I returned it without anyone the wiser, but it could have been a lot worse if I'd mixed the fuel the other way around. Story 21. Being a young, inexperienced driver, my mother asked me to move my sister's car so she could back out. 14-year-old me casually walked over, got in, started it without a problem, checked my mirrors, and buckled up like a responsible driver. Then, things went sideways. I put the car in reverse and started backing up slowly until my heel slipped, causing me to press the gas pedal with all my weight. Next thing I know, I am sending this 2001 Monte Carlo flying out of the driveway, across the street, and into the neighbor's yard. Luckily, in the chaos, I managed to brake and come to a complete stop. Realizing I was okay, I laughed hysterically. But then fear set in as I got out to check for damage, and holy crap, there was none. Nothing was knocked loose, and the car ran smoothly. So I casually moved my sister's car out of the neighbor's yard and parked it where I had intended. To my surprise, no one in the house heard a thing, and I went about the rest of the day thinking I was a sly little genius. Story 22. When I was 14, my friends and I decided it would be a fun idea to borrow one of our mom's cars. That night ended up being the first time I ever drove a car, and the first time I ever crashed one. I managed to drive it home, cleaned off the dirt, painted a rock blue, and threw it at the mangled bumper. Apparently, my friend's mom came home that day with a story about how some jerk must have hit her car in the parking lot at work and driven off. It wasn't until about 7 years later that she apparently turned to him one night and asked, "Hey, you know how my car got damaged a while back? Was that you?" He confirmed it, and she just replied, "Oh well, at least insurance covered it." Story 23. I am a freelance app developer. I was preparing to submit an app to the store for a client. The build was ready, and I was just about to upload it. I will just install it and do a final check, I thought, and I am really glad I was paranoid about it. The app name was just random letter put together. My cat has a bad habit of jumping on my keyboard when I am not looking. He even managed to send a Skype message full of gibberish to a client once. At the time, I was still trying to train him to stay off the desk. I can only imagine my client's reaction if the app had been released with that name. Story 24. My mom is a very soft-spoken, gentle woman. I've only heard her curse once in my life. She's old-fashioned, super kind, and so innocent. She's amazing. As a teenager, I was a rebellious little troublemaker. I had a best friend whose parents were extremely religious. We met at Christian private school, and we would get into all kinds of mischief together. One time, around 2 a.m., we went to another friend's house, someone we hadn't spoken to in years, but who also went to our school. We knocked on his window and asked him to sneak out, but he said he couldn't. He then apparently told his parents, who contacted my friend's parents. We were warned that if we got into any more trouble, we wouldn't be allowed to hang out anymore. One night, my friend and I rode a single bicycle about 10 miles to go see a girl, taking turns sitting on the handlebars. We had a reason for going, but we didn't stay long. After our long, arduous journey, we set out on the return trip. Not 5 minutes after leaving, a cop pulled up and stopped us. It was around 5 a.m., and I hadn't even thought about curfew. He called both our parents, and my mom came to pick us up. The officer couldn't reach my friend's parents, so he left a message on their machine. Knowing this could be the end of our friendship, I convinced my mom to drive to his house on a covert mission. He lived out in the boonies, so she had to turn off her lights and sneak down his country driveway. He snuck inside while his parents slept, deleted the message from the answering machine, and we escaped scot-free. To this day, I still can't believe my mom did that for us. Totally OG behavior, completely uncharacteristic of her. My friend and I are still in contact decades later, even though he now lives in Thailand. Thanks, Mom. Story 25. I started an apprenticeship in IT and was completely underqualified. I was given responsibility for maintaining the intranet site for our entire department, an internal-facing role, so they figured I couldn't break anything customer-facing. They underestimated my power. One Friday evening, when half the department had gone home early, I was experimenting on the site, creating and deleting test pages in a hidden area. I got two different delete buttons on the same page mixed up and accidentally deleted the entire site. And there was no undo. I didn't even have access to the changelog. What I did have was another tab open with the same site in edit mode, which I had completely forgotten about. I hit Save Changes on that tab, and voila, everything was back. After changing my pants, I went home and spent the whole weekend terrified my boss would find out. They never did. Fast forward 2 years, I've trained hard, and now I design systems for our staff. I've never messed up that badly again. Story 26. I installed VNC on our office PC, which runs the account software for our small family business, so I could access it remotely. I had no idea what I was doing and apparently left it unsecured. 10 minutes later, I look at the PC and the mouse pointer is moving on its own. Settings have been changed and I am logged out. Someone had logged in. I totally freaked out for about 30 seconds before deciding to disconnect the PC from the LAN. I was able to log back in and, luckily, not too much had been changed. Got very lucky. Story 27. I work in a CNC workshop, and we often do custom engraving. One day, a guy ordered a wooden jewelry box for his wedding anniversary with a custom message he emailed me. For some reason, he chose to give the box to his wife at the workshop. Not the most romantic setting, but whatever. As she reads it, she starts looking confused and tearing up, "You don't remember the date?" The guy turns pale, looks at me and says, "No, I am sure it's a mistake." I reply, "No, I copied it straight." "Wait a minute. Oh no, it's my fault. I am so sorry. I will redo it right away. No need to pay. Please accept it as a gift." The wife gets a little angry at me, but they leave with a new box with the correct date. The next day, the guy comes back and pays triple the original price without saying a word. Story 28. When I was in high school, my parents had a VW Golf and a station wagon. I had keys to both, though I usually drove the Golf because it was a GTI and a blast to drive. Our local mall had the movie theater, arcade, and food court all near one particular entrance, which was my preferred parking spot. One Saturday, I didn't have much going on, so I drove the station wagon to the mall, played some games, hung out with friends, and eventually drove home. When I got home, both my parents were gone, which was weird, but I thought, cool, I can watch whatever I want on TV. So I grabbed a bag of chips and settled in for a movie on HBO. About an hour in, it hit me. Wait a minute. I didn't drive the Golf to the mall, but I drove the Golf home. Oh crap. Turns out my parents had driven to the mall in the Golf and parked in the same spot I'd used. Somehow, when I left the mall, I saw the Golf, got in, and absent-mindedly drove home. My parents had been at the mall for over an hour, long enough that I was certain my dad was in the middle of calling the cops to report a stolen car. I jumped back in the Golf and sped to the mall. My mom would have killed me if she saw how I drove. By some miracle, their exact parking spot was open, so I parked the car there. Then I walked a couple of rows over, got into the station wagon, and drove home. My parents came back about 30 minutes later. I asked how the mall was, and my dad started ranting about how my mom made him shop for a new bedroom set, but otherwise, everything was fine. I didn't tell them the full story until my late 20s. Story 29. I used to work a pool cleaning route and had a customer whose pool sat at a higher elevation than its pump system. Being 19 and forgetting everything I'd ever learned about physics, I opened the pump skimmer basket to empty it, and a ton of water started pouring out. I frantically twisted valves to no avail and briefly considered calling my boss for help, but thought, no way, because he was a real jerk. So I just put the lid back on the pump. The water was coming out with a lot of force because the majority of a 50,000-gallon pool was trying to escape through this mini geyser, so I just sat on the lid. Once I had it back on, I surveyed the damage. Honestly, it wasn't that bad considering at least 500 gallons had spilled all over the backyard. The neighbor's yard downhill probably got a little flooded, but nobody complained. I refilled my customer's pool to the proper level, tossed in some extra chemicals on the house, of course, and nobody ever knew. Story 30. I took a computer forensics class in college, and our instructor was a legit U.S. officer. I don't remember exactly what branch, but he told us some truly awful stories from federal cases. We were learning about hiding text within the data of image pixels and how to extract it. For our assignment, we had to hide a line of text in an image of Mount Rushmore. I was doing it at a friend's house, and we thought it'd be hilarious to hide the message, "George Washington is a little bitch," right on his face. I submitted the assignment like that. I was the typical goody two-shoes student who never spoke in class and always had a 4.0 comma, so I immediately freaked out when I got home. The next morning, as soon as I got to campus, I re-uploaded the file with a generic sentence instead. The instructor might have thought it was funny, but probably not. Chances are he didn't even decode everyone's work. But I wasn't going to risk it. Story 31. In my Spanish class, we had to do presentations on a country. My partner and I focused on politics and modern aspects of the country we were assigned. The partnership before us presented on Honduras. They introduced their country as Honduras, the murder capital of the world. Their slides were filled with homicides, crime stats, and drug trade information. Then the teacher asked about culture. They scrolled through another 10 slides on the drug trade. Our teacher, who is pretty strict and has a short temper, was not impressed. Apparently, the project was supposed to be exclusively about culture and history. Luckily, we hadn't covered the darker side of Argentina, or else she probably would have lost it. We got time to redo our presentation while the teacher held a grudge against the other group for the rest of the year. Edit. The teacher's daughter, who was also fluent in Spanish, was there that day because she didn't have school. So yeah, imagine two high schoolers talking trash about your country in front of your daughter. Story 32. I was about 10 years old, playing golf with my granddad at the driving range. I was having a terrible day, just blasting balls up to the 100-yard sign with no air at all. When we were finished, my granddad went to start picking up balls, but I was still raging and had a few left. I put one on a tee, smacked it, and heard that sweet ting. This ball was traveling really far. My granddad was way up the driving range, picking up his balls, and the ball was going straight for the back of his head. Time seemed to slow down. I could see the trajectory, and it was heading right for him. By sheer luck, just as the ball was about to hit him, he bent down to pick up a ball, and it narrowly missed. That was the luckiest moment of my life. I also have another extremely close call golfing story, but this one still tops it. Story 33. I failed one of my college classes, which would have prevented me from taking a prerequisite for the next semester. The class I failed wasn't offered again until the following year, which would have pushed my graduation back an entire year. On top of that, I am in a program for older students, not fresh out of high school, that covers my tuition and fees. I had no idea what would have happened if I needed to stay an extra year. I probably would have had to pay out of pocket, which I couldn't afford. I went to my academic advisor, who was surprised I failed that class since all my other marks were good. I had no real excuse. I just wasn't paying attention in that class, hadn't handed in half the assignments, and did poorly on the tests. She told me to talk to the professor to see if anything could be done, since it was unusual for me to completely bomb just that one class. The professor told me he'd have to speak with the associate dean because the semester had ended, but there was still a week before final grades were due. He needed permission for me to hand in late work and retake the final exam, and in the meantime, I should start completing as many missed assignments as possible. I am so grateful to that professor. The dean gave permission. The system was overridden to let me enroll in the class that required the prerequisite, and I worked on handing in the missed assignments and retaking the final exam, all within a week. In the end, I passed the class, my grade was updated, and I stayed on track. I didn't even miss any of the new class sessions because the professor told me to attend even before I was officially enrolled. I only told one close friend about this. I didn't want to worry my parents. They'd already been disappointed when I dropped out years earlier, and I didn't inform the program either. I am still on track to graduate and still have my schooling paid for. It was an extremely stressful week, completely my fault, but I made sure never to make that mistake again. Story 34. One night during my sophomore year of college, I came home drunk and desperately needed to go to the bathroom. I shared a room with two other girls who were both asleep at the time. Instead of using the bathroom, I went into our closet and peed into one of my roommate's laundry baskets. The weird thing was, I was fully aware of what I was doing, but for some reason, I didn't think it was a big deal. The next morning, I completely forgot about it until I went into the closet. Before my roommate woke up, I took out all her dirty clothes, which were now covered in pee, washed them, and disinfected the laundry bin. Luckily, it was plastic, so it was easy to clean. Even though she's my best friend, it's been about 4 years and I've still never told her. I am waiting for the right time. Story 35. I was in a data center working on a box that had a bad disk in an array for a host that hadn't been built yet. I removed the failed foreign disk logically from the array using the config software, then walked around the row to the front of the server to physically pull the bad disk so I could replace it with a good one from stock. Somehow, I miscounted which server it was in the rack and accidentally pulled a live disk from an active host during production hours. Oops! I popped the disk back in immediately. An SA caught the disk removal in the logs, but confirmed it was back online almost immediately. I called my boss to let him know. He was cool about it, and I kept my job. He and maybe the SA knew what happened, but no one else ever knew that I had pulled a live drive out of a running host in the middle of production. Story 35. When I was 13, I was left to my own devices one summer day. This was particularly dangerous, as I didn't have internet to occupy me. So, like any curious teen boy, I started playing with fire. I began with magnifying glasses and a parabolic mirror, then eventually moved up to WD-40 and a lighter. My childhood home was in a small town and had a fireplace, so we often kept a pile of wood near the garage. Naturally, giant black ants were attracted to it. Being the evil genius I was, I decided to get rid of the ants crawling up the garage door frame. I took my makeshift redneck flamethrower, blasted some CCR's Fortunate Son, and prepared to channel my inner war hero. But I forgot to remove the little straw from the sprayer nozzle, which immediately extinguished my tiny flame. Humiliated but undeterred, I restarted the song, unleashed my fiery vengeance, and successfully scorched the ants. Here's where things got really fun. I hadn't noticed how much WD-40 had soaked into the painted wooden door frame. As I finished my ant god duties, I saw the fire creeping up the wood. Panic set in as flames started spreading. I grabbed the water hose and put out the fire, only to find a clearly burned, paintless spot on the door frame. I quickly scrubbed away the smoke residue and formulated a plan: repaint it. I grabbed my allowance, hopped on my bike, and headed to a hardware store 3 miles away. I couldn't go to the usual store. Everyone knew my grandfather there, and I didn't want the clerk to recognize me. At the hardware store, I found a clerk to mix a matching seafoam green matte paint. I rehashed my tale, and he laughed hysterically at my misery. I paid, got tips on drying the paint quickly, and pedaled home frantically before my mom got back. Channeling Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction, I sanded the frame, prepped it, and painted the tricky spots first. About 45 minutes later, I'd finished, set up fans to dry it, and the door looked as if nothing had happened. My clever paint job saved me. When my mom came home, she never noticed a thing. My 13-year-old life was saved by a 5-gallon can of paint and a helpful hardware store clerk. It wasn't until 10 years later, after moving twice, that I confessed the story at Thanksgiving. My mom and grandparents found it hilarious, and it's become a running joke ever since. Story 36. Not me, but my dad. Story confirmed by him and a bunch of his friends, so definitely true. He was on a rugby tour with his team, and in classic rugby tour fashion, they were being idiots in their hotel, drinking too much, being rowdy, the usual. At one point, my dad ended up chasing a teammate down the hallway. The teammate reached the room at the end of the hall, slammed the door behind him, and my dad, who was 6'5", 195 centimeters, and about 17 stone, 238 pounds at the time, didn't have time to stop. He went straight through the door, taking it off its hinges and cracking the wood in several places. The next day, they were due to leave, and the hotel manager had warned that if anything else was broken, they'd be thrown out, and there were full room inspections scheduled. Luckily, my dad was a handy guy and always carried a small set of screwdrivers. He and his teammates managed to screw the door and hinges back into place, but the cracks in the door were obvious. The door was dark brown, but the internal wood was cheap light brown chipboard. One teammate came up with a plan. Each room had the standard hotel complimentary tea, coffee, biscuits, and a small tub of Nutella. Nutella, conveniently, was almost a perfect color match for the broken door. Rooms donated their Nutella to the cause, and they carefully smeared it into the cracks to make them blend in. During the inspection, the manager went through each room while they watched. They left the door open, hoping he wouldn't notice it at all. He didn't. He came in, looked around, and shut the door behind him. The chocolate-filled cracks held, and he didn't notice a thing. As far as anyone involved knows, the hotel never contacted the club about the door in the following weeks. The running theory is that since he missed it during the inspection, they couldn't be blamed, even if he noticed the damage later. Story 37. Shudder just typing this one out. At the start of a 450-mile road trip home from my in-laws, I strapped my baby daughter into her car seat and placed the seat in the car. After finishing packing a few small items, we set off. Just over 2 hours later, we stopped, and I went to take the baby out. That's when I realized the car seat hadn't been secured at all. It had just been sitting on the back seat. I was supposed to fasten it with the seat belt, but in my sleep-deprived state, I completely forgot. We had traveled almost 150 miles like that. One emergency stop or a careless driver rear-ending us could have had dire consequences. I am not going to tell my other half. Story 38. I almost fed a Muslim man pork. I work in a restaurant, both in the kitchen and running food to tables. Near the end of a long, stressful night, I was exhausted. Only 2 orders were left on my screen, a braised beef poutine and a pulled pork poutine. They looked almost identical, so I asked my supervisor which was which. He handed me the braised beef poutine to give to a regular. I slathered gravy on it and handed it to one of our porters to run to the table, since they were good friends. When the porter got there, the customer asked if he was really about to eat pork despite his religion. Luckily, they sorted it out before the food even hit the table. The customer has an amazing sense of humor and thought our porter was joking. It's kind of an inside joke now, but I would felt awful if he'd actually eaten it. Story 39. This happened today. I went swimming at the local pool. Due to my weight, I probably should have just stayed in the shallow end to get out, but instead I used the plastic ladder. Naturally, I snapped the bottom rung and fell back into the water like an idiot. I quickly pretended I had just slipped, held my ankle while fixing the rung, and swam over to the shallow end to check my sore ankle. Then I limped all the way to the office to tell them one of the swimming pool ladder rungs had broken. "Must have been the kids or something," I said. Edit. They probably knew exactly what happened, but I was too embarrassed to check. Story 40. We got an order for 30. Yes, 30 high-end HP servers, about £600K worth of kit. We ordered the RAM and disks from a separate supplier we'd used for years. We were about 90% of the way through installing the RAM when I noticed it was the incorrect voltage. It wouldn't have exploded or melted, but it would have resulted in 30 servers being shipped to a client with effectively zero functioning RAM, a disaster waiting to happen. I had to call the supplier, arrange a refund, and luckily they were cool. They agreed to take the stock back and not charge for the resale, given how much business we'd given them on this order. A new RAM arrived via same-day courier. Turns out the guy who specs the systems had been looking at 2 different HP server spec sheets and got his wires crossed. The HP part number service didn't flag an error because technically it was the correct RAM, just not for this build. We had all the servers spec'd and ready to ship the next morning, and the client was over the moon. This could have cost us £600K in redundant servers and potentially millions in client business if that first order had bombed. Story 41. I work in a research lab back then in cardiology dealing with human and animal tissues for procedures like DNA ctRNA extractions and other molecular protocols. My boss had been complaining for a couple of weeks that the -80°C freezer needed to be inventoried and that really old samples should be tossed. So one weekend, I decided to be a good worker and clean the freezer. There was a rule in the lab: if something is unlabeled, throw it out. I didn't make the rule, but it was there. In my haste, I tossed an unlabeled box, among other things, containing multiple small tubes with samples. That Monday, I got a frantic call from my boss asking about the box. Turns out he had placed it in the freezer the day before I started cleaning. Inside were multiple heart samples from a teenager who had passed away a couple of years earlier. In research, it's rare to get human samples from someone that young. Hearts at that age are generally healthy, so the amount of data that could be produced from those samples was enormous. The rest of the staff supported me, pointing out that the box wasn't labeled, but I still won't forget that in my attempt to help, I essentially threw away a heart. Story 42. This happened in high school. I was retaking world history in a room full of freshmen I didn't know. We had a group project to unmess up Africa by redrawing nations in a way that made more sense than the arbitrary borders European explorers had drawn. In my group, there was a girl who for some reason had a massive hang-up about Cancun. She insisted on naming one of the nations we created after it. She picked a desert nation and called it Sandcoun. I sat there for a solid minute debating whether to let it happen and watch it crash and burn in glorious chaos. In the end, I decided I didn't want to go down with the ship. I lowered my voice and calmly explained why that was a terrible idea. If it had been any other group, I probably would have kept my mouth shut, but I found the whole thing absolutely hysterical. Story 43. My whole family was really involved in musical theater growing up. In 8th grade, I was in a musical called It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, and unsurprisingly, I played Superman. My dad directed the show, and my mom did the costumes. As you can imagine, there were scenes as Clark Kent and scenes as Superman. One scene in particular had me walking in front of the curtain and changing from Clark Kent into Superman in a phone booth. At first, reciting lines and singing while changing was tough, but by the performances, I was a little too comfortable. One night, I finished a scene as Clark Kent, walked downstage, and started my monologue in front of the curtain, half undressed, when I noticed my dad in the back of the theater freaking out. That's when it hit me. I was 2 scenes too early. I was about to leave my costume in the phone booth on stage and needed to be back as Clark Kent almost immediately. I finished the scene and walked through the curtains, where my mom had a new costume ready. She coached me through continuing the show without making my mistake obvious. It involved repeating a lot of lines with exasperated "again" tags thrown in. For about 5 minutes, in front of hundreds of people, I was in full-on panic mode, but it worked. No one seemed to notice. Story 44. I was driving in a snowstorm in the North Woods near Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Recently, I had a drive to Chicago ahead of me, which I usually make in about 4 hours. I drive a small VW Jetta and for some reason felt confident going 90 miles per hour on a snow-covered highway. I hit a small ice patch, lost control of the steering because I panicked and braked too suddenly, and my car drifted what felt like 50 feet, spinning out of control. I clutched the wheel, praying I wouldn't end up in a ditch, or worse, hit someone. Miraculously, my car finally stopped in the middle of the highway. I looked around, no other cars in sight. I chalked it up to God being merciful and drove the rest of the way home at a more reasonable 40 miles per hour. Story 45. A few years back, my best mate sent me an email at work. It was full of swearing and complaining about how disgusting he felt after eating KFC the night before, and he made a crude comparison to, well, let's just say it involved a fat chick, good at the time, regretful afterwards. The problem? He realized after sending it that he had accidentally sent it to one of his important clients instead of me. He freaked out, thinking he was going to lose his job. He tried recalling the email, but it didn't work. That afternoon, he rushed home with a desperate plan, log into the client's email and delete the message himself. He tried all sorts of password combinations. None worked until he remembered the client had mentioned her son before. Using the son's name as the password, it worked. There it was, his inappropriate email, sitting unread in the client's inbox. Thankfully, he managed to delete all traces of it, and neither the client nor his company ever knew. That could have gone very badly for him. Story 46. I used to work in sales at a telco. A customer called in, wanting to relocate his business to a different exchange. Standard procedure was to transfer him to the relocations team, but I was on a performance plan for poor sales and figured I had nothing to lose. This customer was sizable, spending a few thousand a month. If I handled it myself, I could hit a full month's target in one go. So I did. The guy ended up with a full new set of lines, effectively doubling his account. Nobody survives a PPE, but somehow I did. My manager hated me and couldn't believe I actually made target. What happened with the customer afterward? I have absolutely no idea. Any complaints never reached me or my manager. Story 47. I used to work in a print shop that did binding. One day, a university student came in with their dissertation, the only copy which was due that afternoon. They asked for it to be bound. I had about 3 hours, so no problem. I started punching the holes but didn't pay close attention and punched one set too close to the edge. No way that could be fixed. I spent the next 2 hours scanning each page individually in high quality, manually photoshopping out the punch hole marks and reprinting them. Luckily, it was only about 50 pages, not all 600, but it was still a ton of work. I finished about 20 minutes before the student came to pick it up. Crisis averted. Story 48. The screw-up wasn't mine, but I ended up fixing it for my friend before it ruined his reputation. He works in politics at the Ministry of Defense in France, not a high position, but still comfortable for his age. One day, his boss asked him to take a quick screenshot of his work, Windows interface and all, to use as an illustration for a leaflet or something. The problem? My friend was watching Korn at the time, not a big deal in general. But he's easily distracted. He took a screenshot of his professional screen with an Xvideos tab still visible in the browser. Thankfully, he hadn't sent it yet. A few hours later, he told me he'd been called for a screenshot and was freaking out. I asked to see it, and awkwardly had to tell him, "Hey, you should probably take another one without the Korn tab." He was horrified, but extremely grateful. We still laugh about it to this day. Story 49. I was working on my master's thesis. using liquid chromatography HPLC. Like the diligent student I was, I always arrived at the lab before my supervisor to set up the HPLC. The drawback, I was sleep-deprived most of the time. The maximum pressure the HPLC could handle was 2 psi. My supervisor, who was pretty abusive, had made it very clear, yelling in my face, that under no circumstances should the psi exceed 2. If it did, the column would be permanently damaged. One morning, I got to the deserted lab and set up my experiment. I turned on the HPLC with just solvent to clean the column, went to grab a coffee, and came back. On the LED screen, PSI 20. I was terrified. My sleep-deprived brain had messed up. The HPLC was humming like a dragon giving birth to a truck. I still had 10 minutes to fix it, and I did absolutely nothing. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the screen and spreading chocolate sundaes into my pants. When my supervisor arrived, he said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I mumbled something, nearly puked in his face, and set up my next experiment, my own little mortal punishment, my scientific suicide. Thoughts of expulsion, threats, and failing my MSc flooded my brain. Miraculously, the experiment turned out fine, a little noisy, but fine. My supervisor was just being a dick, and apparently, the column could withstand pressures higher than 2 psi. Story 50. This was a mess caused by my brother a while ago. My mom had been away on holiday for about a week and was returning late afternoon. Naturally, my dad made us all tidy the house, vacuum the stairs, wash the dirty plates, fluff cushions, dust shelves, to make everything look perfect for her arrival. A couple of hours later, the house was sparkling. Mom was due within the hour. This was the moment my brother, about 6 at the time, chose to use the bathroom. What you need to know is that he was famous in our family for taking the thickest, longest surprises you could imagine, despite being the smallest person in the house. He also used an absurd amount of toilet paper. A few minutes go by. We hear the toilet flush and the cistern refill. Then a second flush as he tries to remove the massive turd python. A third flush follows, because apparently that didn't work either. The bathroom is directly above the kitchen, where my dad is sitting. Water begins to drip through the floor. Dad rushes upstairs to find my embarrassed brother kneeling over the toilet, trying to control the overflow. He's sent out to mop the kitchen floor while Dad plunges the toilet with a brush, spilling more water in the process. Soon the kitchen is a shallow lake, just half an hour before Mom arrives. Dad first tries using the vacuum cleaner to suck up the water, which works for about 2 minutes before the dust filter needs emptying. Then he remembers a neighbor has a water pump, and that finally does the trick. With 15 minutes to spare, we mop the kitchen floor and remove the soaked toilet paper from the bathroom carpet. Mom arrives home completely oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded. Ever since, there's always been a faint eau de toilette whenever the vacuum cleaner is used. Story 51. I was a server at a semi-nice restaurant when my table decided to order a bottle of wine. As I refilled a woman's glass, she started chatting with me about school or something. As I lifted the bottle, a small drop of wine fell right on her phone. I braced for the worst, but she didn't notice. No one drew attention to it. Keeping eye contact, I continued the conversation while subtly pulling a cocktail napkin from my apron and patting her phone dry. I wrapped up everyone's order and went about my night thinking I was the sneakiest server alive. Toward the end of the meal, the women had gone to the bathroom as I dropped off the check. The husband of the woman with the phone turned to me and said, "That was a pretty smooth move you pulled there with the phone." Stunned, a mix of embarrassment and pride, I muttered, "Whatever it takes," bracing for a reminder to be careful. Instead, the table burst into laughter, complimented me for my service, and left. As they left, the woman with the phone gave me a coy goodbye. They also spoke to my manager about how much they enjoyed my company and left a generous tip. I guess sometimes a little slip-up can lead to unexpectedly good outcomes. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.